The best survival horror franchises in gaming all covered a certain cornerstone of horror. You have Resident Evil, which is the fear of the natural world, the fear of big, scary beasts and creatures and monsters with giant claws and teeth and all that shit. Natural, primal horror. You have Silent Hill, the fear of the self, the fear of the psyche, the fear of what's inside, up here in the head. That's Silent Hill. Then you have Fatal Frame. And Fatal Frame, what is Fatal Frame all about? The fear of darkness and death, the fear of what lies beyond. You know, what lies beyond the unknown of death, and what if it is vengeful and hates you? And that is Fatal Frame. And for my money, the best Fatal Frame was always Fatal Frame 2, Crimson Butterfly. It is the best game in the series, and it has been brought back, remade, better than ever. It is spectacular. This might be my favorite remake in a while. This might be up there with, like, I kid you not, the Resident Evil 2 remake from Capcom. It might be that good. It might be as good as the Resident Evil 2 remake, because it's so, like, first of all, it's so faithful to the OG. They didn't make any drastic changes of any kind to the story, to the atmosphere, to the vibes. It's not like, say, I don't know, the Metal Gear Solid 3 remake, where it's like it wasn't really necessary to begin with, and they just threw a new coat of paint on it, and it's like, okay, at least they didn't ruin anything from that game, but, like, it almost doesn't do enough to justify its existence. It's like, that game was just literally a new coat of paint with some tweaked controls. But Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly remake does go beyond that. You know, it's more than just a copy-paste of the original game with an over-the-shoulder camera. You know, it does play and feel a lot like Fatal Frame 4 and 5 in the sense that it does have the over-the-shoulder camera, but they also completely redid the combat system, even though at its core it's still the same. You know, you still wait for ghostly enemies to get super close to you and then take a Fatal Frame shot with your camera at just the right second to damage them. That's still there, but they've added a lot of extra layers and new mechanics to it that I think is pretty interesting and mostly works really, really well for the most part. I think some people still might not have the patience for this game's combat simply because it is so different from other horror games. But yeah, you give it half the chance, this is a great place to start for Fatal Frame, for the series. Because it is, like, probably the best playing and best looking Fatal Frame game ever made to date. It just feels snappier, it flows really well. And Fatal Frame 2 has always had the best pacing. You know, part of the reason why it's the best game in the series, it's super well paced, extremely well paced. This game, for the most part, has like the exact same location, the cursed village in the game. It's the exact same layout as the original game. I think they've added maybe some new rooms and some new small areas here and there, but, like, I'll admit it's been a long time since I played Fatal Frame 2 on the PS2 back in 2003. So, but I recognized a lot. Like, so much came back to me, and I was so happy over and over again playing this game to be like, I remember this room, I remember this house that you go into, I remember this bridge, I remember all that stuff. Like, great moments. All that's, like, all the cutscenes are the same, all the dialogue is the same. They didn't feel the need to add, like, loads of new excessive dialogue like they did with Silent Hill 2 remake. You know, you don't have, like, a whole new scene with Mio and Mayu, the main characters, the two twin girls. They don't suddenly have, like, a moment where they stop and have a long bit of dialogue they didn't have in the original game. It stays very minimalistic, which I like, because Fatal Frame 2 does not have, like, it has an incredible story, but most of that story is delivered in very subtle, creepy cutscenes that are short or whatever. And, like, it has a lot of lore, it has a lot of diaries to find. I especially love that they kept the audio logs that you find in the game. It's kind of like, I guess you could say it's similar to, like, the audio logs you find in, like, Dead Space or BioShock, where you pick up something and you have, like, a creepy, spooky recording of somebody doing something or getting killed or whatever. But the difference is, at Fatal Frame 2, because, of course, you're in this old, cursed village, there's no technology outside of this magical camera. and the flashlight you have. So like what it is you find these jewels, you find these little rocks, and you have what's called a spirit radio on you. And as weird as it might sound, it's super creepy, it's super cool, because what you're listening to when you find a rock or a crystal while exploring or whatever, and you use this spirit radio, and it just plays like memories, cursed, scary memories from the village's history. So they're not like actual recordings. It's just like a way to do audio logs in a different way, but you still have plenty of traditional survival horror like diaries to find as well about the village's history and everything, just like you would in a Silent Hill game or Resident Evil game. So lots of lore. Like all the best story stuff in Fatal Frame 2 is mostly lore, but you do have great cutscenes and great moments. But considering Mio and Mayu are the only two main living characters in the game and everybody else is a ghost, as you can imagine, the story is kind of minimalistic when it comes to dialogue and interactions. So that's really cool. So for those who don't know, the story involves these twin girls who are in the woods one day just chilling by a river or whatever, and they get spirited away. You know, Mio's sister Mayu, she gets distracted by this magical crimson butterfly, the titular crimson butterfly, and she gets spirited away they both get spirited away to a cursed village from like 100 years ago or something that's been wiped out and lost to history. Nobody knows what happened to it, and they stumble upon it, and they're trapped there. They're in like a cursed dimension, and the only way they can escape is to unravel what's going on with this ritual that cursed the village in the first place. And the ritual just happens to involve twins. So I won't go any further with that, but it's a very dark, very creepy story. You spend most of it alone, because most of the game you're just Mio searching for your sister Mayu, who keeps wandering off because she keeps getting possessed by the ghostly forces in this village for some sinister purpose. So great story, like it's really good. And like I said, most of it is lore driven. There's not a ton of cutscenes or dialogue in this game, and what little there is mostly just very creepy and unsettling. So it's good stuff. Like, you know, it's part of the reason why this is considered the best Fatal Frame game. But like I said, it's also just really well paced. Surprisingly, my first playthrough took me like nearly 20 hours, but it didn't feel like 20 hours. It didn't feel long because this game is so tightly paced. But it also doesn't hold your hand too much. I feel like they preserved that feeling that I always loved about Fatal Frame 2 of feeling lost. Even when, you know, it's not like super, super hard to know where to go next, but like any good horror game, it doesn't hold your hand. You are forced to explore your surroundings. And unlike Silent Hill and Resident Evil, there's not a ton of puzzles in Fatal Frame. So it's not like you're solving a ton of puzzles or anything. Most of your gameplay, when you're not fighting ghosts, just involves inspecting your environment, just looking around. There's not even a ton of key hunting. And that is something that makes Fatal Frame interesting, is that most of what guides your exploration and gets you to go to other rooms and whatever is just going into a room or whatever. You use your camera to like look for clues, and then all of a sudden a ghostly photograph will appear, or some kind of ghostly image will appear, providing a clue that you have to go back to another room that has something different now that it didn't have before. There's a lot of that in Fatal Frame, and it works really, really well given the supernatural setting and vibe of the story. There are some light puzzles here and there, kind of similar to those other games, you know, but it doesn't have a ton of those, which is interesting. And it works, you know, it works in Fatal Frame's case just because the camera plays such a big role in the game. You're using it just as much outside of combat as you are in combat. You know, it's used to look for clues and ghostly traces of like the village's history that gives you clues as to where to go next. And sometimes it can be used to unlock other areas and things like that. So yeah, it's super cool, and I like how they've added like new filters to the camera that also aid you in your exploration, sometimes revealing hidden walls and hidden rooms, and it's like they've added some interesting stuff with that. As far as the combat is concerned, they have kind of made it more complex, which was a little worrying at first, because part of what I love about Fatal Frame's combat is how simple it is. It's very simple, very clever and brilliant. You wait for the ghost to get close enough to you, you time it right, and you do more damage. And evade them at just the right time. And that's never felt better in this game, in my opinion. It's very snappy. Like I said, you have a new dodge mechanic that really gives you a little more extra mobility that you maybe didn't have in past games. And it might sound like a small thing, but it really does make the combat better to me in this game. But they also added some new mechanics, in addition to some old ones carried over from Fatal Frame 4 and 5. Like, they brought back the ghost hand thingy, the little ghost hand thingy where you go to pick up certain items. You have to hold down a button as Mio slowly reaches out her hand. And if you're not careful, a ghost will grab you while you're doing that. That started in Fatal Frame 4. Good news is they've tweaked it a lot since then, and it actually works much better in this remake of 2, where, first of all, you're not doing that every time you pick up an item, so it doesn't get repetitive and annoying. Second of all, when you do have to slowly grab an item, it's creepy because the ghost hand doesn't grab you that often. And again, just like the 4 and 5, you can, hit the dodge button immediately, or, well, not the dodge button, you let go of the grab button where you're grabbing the item and she pulls back and the ghost hand misses you. But it's still a cool mechanic, but they tweaked it so much in this game that it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's not constantly happening, because in 4 and 5, I feel like that ghost hand mechanic got a little annoying. It was just too often, and they also added something kind of similar with the leer mechanic, where a ghost can leer you now, which is like give you a scary glare. It works better to me when you're opening doors rather than in combat, because when you're opening doors, when you go to open doors to rooms in this game, sometimes if you're too careless and you do it too quick, a ghost will be on the other side of the door and they'll glare you, and you'll lose your stamina as a penalty. And it's like, oh, that's fucking... You'll lose all your stamina, and you'll have to start the fight against that ghost as it comes through the door or whatever. And you'll have to be without stamina at the start of the fight. It's not super, super hard to recover your stamina in this game, mind you, but it's like, oh shit, I could have... The thing is, you can avoid that. If you open a door carefully and slowly, and you see just a little bit of a sign of a ghost's shoulder or something before they can glare you, you could close it back and get out of there. And the ghost will still appear and you'll have to fight it, but you'll still have your stamina, So it's literally a jump scare that you can avoid if you're careful. So it's actually really cool. I love that mechanic. It's kind of like another version of the ghost hand mechanic, I guess you could say. And it just adds another layer of creepy interactivity to the game that forces you to play cautiously, and I think that's very smart. Now, there's another new mechanic in the ghost combat that I'm a little more divided on, just a tiny bit, and that would be the rage mechanic, or as the game calls it, like the aggravated ghost mechanic. Basically, what happens now during a lot of ghost fights is ghosts can get enraged. They'll light up red and get tougher and scarier, and more importantly, they'll recover some of their lost health while you were fighting them. And yeah, I'll admit, towards the end of this game, there were a couple of fights, maybe 1 or 2 boss fights, that it got a little frustrating with that, just because if you don't have a lot of strong camera ammo on you and you're forced to use the weakest ammo from the camera, those fights can really drag sometimes, because they'll keep recovering their health if you don't get it down fast enough, and it can feel like they drag a bit too long. And that's happened to me occasionally with, like, I want to say 2 fights, and one of those 2 fights was right before the final boss, and I'll be honest, was a little rage-inducing, because I didn't quite understand it at first. It was very different from the other bosses in the game. And yeah, without spoiling too much, it's just the rage mechanic with certain encounters in this game I just felt like was a little obnoxious. I don't think it necessarily adds that much to the game's combat, but I didn't mind it for most of the game. For most of the game, it was just like, okay, this is a way to make ghost fights more unpredictable. So I didn't hate it, but at the same time, I could kind of take it or leave it. I don't think it's like the best new mechanic in this game. For all the good things they've done to the combat, the fact that you feel more mobile and you can evade better, and the combat in general just feels better than any Fatal Frame game before it. And pretty much everything new that they've added to this game is cool, but the rage mechanic is the one thing, because it does pop up a surprising amount towards the end of the game, and it becomes, I don't know, I was just getting a little like, there were times where the fights weren't even necessarily hard. Sometimes they were just like, they would drag. I was like, he's in rage mode again, and he's recovering some of that health, and I kind of want to be done with you, bro. So there's fights like that. There's fights like that. Again, I think it was only like 2 particular battles towards the end that kind of made me feel that way. So it's still an interesting mechanic, but it's the only new mechanic in the game that I think I would have been fine if it wasn't there. Like, didn't really need it, you know? Now, like a lot of new mechanics that have been introduced over the Fatal Frame series, this could be tweaked in the future and maybe made better. But I think it still works really well for most of this game, you know? Even if it's not, like, essential to making combat better than it was before, like some of the new things they've added. It's just a way to kind of, I guess, make the combat a bit more challenging was the idea. But, I guess we'll have to see how they handle it in the future if they bring it back again. But by no means, even during some of the more frustrating fights with the rage mechanic, I could see myself handling it better maybe on, you know, future playthroughs, just because I'll probably stock up on better ammo for those fights. But overall, I have really nothing bad to say about this remake over those tiny little gripes. It is a beautiful, gorgeous looking game. I love what they've done with the graphics. It's not Capcom money. It's not running on the RE engine, mind you, but it's running on Koei Tecmo's Katana engine, which is beautiful. It does look really nice here. The way they've handled the lighting from the moonlight over the village adds a very different, distinct vibe visually than the original game. And I also love the way they redesigned Mio and Mayu, the twins in this game. Their dresses, the way they redesigned the dresses, they look really beautiful. I like how they look a little more distinct, even though they still look like twins at the same time than they did in the OG. They're just a bit more stylized in a way that I think just looks cool. You know, I like those outfits, and I like just how they look in game with the lighting and everything. They're just really good. And the game in general is just beautiful and pretty, as bleak and haunting as it is. And yeah, they've just retained everything I love about it, you know? It's just still a really cool game. And in most ways, I would argue this is a more approachable, accessible, and playable game than the OG. You know, even if some people might complain about the loss of fixed camera angles and things like that, I think the over-the-shoulder works just fine. I think it worked fine in Fatal Frame 4 and 5 as well. And I think it even works even better here because they've added some more movement options. You actually have a stealth mechanic now. You can crouch and sometimes hide from ghosts. But it doesn't feel like something that comes into play too much either, or screw with the original gameplay of the original game. It's just like a lot of the changes they've made to this game. It's a lot of stuff just feels like it's well integrated. You know, nothing feels tacked on to the original game's design. Nothing feels like it's shoehorned in there. It all just works really well. In fact, I'd even go so far as to say, regarding Resident Evil 9 Requiem, which I loved, but if you're one of those people, because I know there were a lot of people who, I hate when it turns into an action game. I hate when Leon takes over that game and it's not Grace anymore in the creepy hospital. And it's like, okay, if you're that person, here's the thing. Yeah, if you were bitching about that, play Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly Remake, because it's literally just Grace Ashcroft in the care center, but a whole game. I mean, yes, it doesn't deal with zombies, it deals with ghosts, and the horror vibes are different, obviously, but unless you just absolutely had to have zombies in your spooky game, it has a lot of the same. Honestly, a lot of the horror and exploration and sneaking around ghosts sometimes and fighting them even feels as vulnerable and creepy as playing as Grace in the care center of RE9. So I feel like I could recommend this to people who maybe didn't like the more action-oriented stuff in that game. Maybe play this. I don't know. I love them both. I love all different styles of horror, of course, and action and everything else. But Fatal Frame 2, Crimson Butterfly Remake, it does stand out in that it does stay spooky and creepy and bleak for the whole game. It is a dark, creepy game for the whole game. You know, you never go to some well-lit area where suddenly everything stops being horror. You know what I mean? And that's something, that's something that may add some extra incentive to, finally check this series out. It's different. It's an alternative to that, you know? It is not just another, like, Resident Evil style game. It has its own qualities. So, like, definitely check it out if you've never played Fatal Frame before. This was actually co-developed by Team Ninja, which I think is pretty cool. Might be, I think it's the first Fatal Frame game they've worked on. I don't think they've ever, like, were involved in any of the past Fatal Frame games. But I think the way they redesigned the combat feels really good, and that makes a lot of sense to me, given that Team Ninja are the guys behind Ninja Gaiden. You wouldn't think they'd be a good fit for Fatal Frame, given that this is a slow-paced horror game and not a high-speed ninja action game. But you know what? Hats off to them. They pulled it off pretty damn well for the most part. And even with some minor gripes regarding the way fights play out towards the end of the game, I still think this is a fantastic remake. And now that it is such a good remake of the original Fatal Frame 2, I can say it's one of the scariest, creepiest games I've ever played. Especially with 3D audio, good God. So yeah, that's on PS5 now. It's only $50, not even a $70 game. Like, check it out, man. It's a meaty survival horror experience, and you should not be disappointed if you just want a spooky horror game with a good story. Yeah, so that's my thoughts on Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly Remake. What did you guys think? Have you played it? Do you plan to play it? Are you new to the series? Let me know in the comments below, and until next time, you get to burning and live for the passion.